Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Where is the Line? I'm your host, Sabrina Freehoff, and I'm joined by my other co-host, Jane. Jane, how are you doing?
Hello, I am doing all right. I'm feeling a little sick today. I feel like I've been going to the office a lot. I've been a big social butterfly, which has this downside, which is getting sick. So I'm at a place right now where the feeling of you have a tickle in your throat and you're just questioning, is sleeping for 12 hours going to solve my tickle? Or is this going to be a full-blown illness? So that's like I'm flirting with getting sick at the moment.
Ooh.
How are you? You just came back from your trip.
Yes, I did. Well, I hope you feel better. Yeah, I came back from Jamaica and it was wonderful. First time. Highly recommend this beautiful island. It was my, I had been to Puerto Rico, but otherwise I have not really tried out the Caribbean. So yeah, it was wonderful. I did have a little bit of an incident getting there though on the
Tell
plane.
us.
Yeah, about 50 minutes prior to landing, I got really dizzy and I just had my egg retrieval 2 days before, so for my egg freezing. So I thought, am I just dehydrated? So I walked to the bathroom or raced to the bathroom. And then in the bathroom, I almost fainted. So I just called the stewardess and I'm like, I'm so sorry, but I think I'm about to faint. And she was so quick on her feet, like immediately got me like a cold pack and water and
Oh my gosh.
electrolytes. And then they called the air. I was one of those people where the
Oh
pilot called
my.
up, like, is there any medics or any nurses on the plane? And there were five, like raised their hand immediately. They all came and like checked on me. So long story short, I was fine. But yeah, I was just extremely dehydrated and they took really great care of me though. So Delta, shout out to Delta. They did a great job. And these beautiful nurses, they were so kind and so caring. So yeah, I landed. They did offer additional sort of care. So I
Hmm.
could go to like a Jamaican hospital, even though that's not really advised. And I ended up being fine. It just was extreme example of dehydration
Oh my
post-surgery.
gosh.
Yeah, a little scary, but I made it.
Very scary. I feel like you always hear, well, I've definitely been on planes where they called for like a professional, and I'm always like so nervous. And I feel like
Yeah.
the rest of the plane is probably concerned about their flight. They're like, are we gonna is somebody like in trouble? Well, I'm glad
Yeah.
you're feeling better. Oh, I'm sorry that is very scary.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So anyway, but yeah, the rest of the trip was incredible. We did a catamaran. Our friends got engaged, and it was my best friend's 30th birthday. So we had two occasions to celebrate.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And the pictures looked incredible. Also, you're looking very tanned, so good for you. Very jealous over here. I'm so glad you had a good trip. Sabrina, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes, I'm so delighted to have my wonderful friend Kristin Chen on. Chris and I go way back. We worked together at a tech company, and I've always admired her. Like she's just such a go-getter, and every time I was on a project with her, she would just crush it. And I have so much admiration for her, and excited for her to share her story. It's going to get quite vulnerable today, but I think it's a very, very important topic, one that it doesn't get talked about enough, especially as people may fear retaliation. And so I think today I should just be an open space and safe space for Kristin to share. And the goal is to inspire others to be able to speak up and really hold others accountable. So I'm very excited. But Kristin, please, I want you to introduce yourself and welcome to Where's the Line?
Thanks, Sabrina. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really an honor to be on the podcast. I've been a fan since Sabrina and Jane launched it. Sabrina said Sabrina go way back to LinkedIn days. LinkedIn was actually my first job in tech. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But she's been a close friend, confidant, and I've learned so much from her as well and been inspired by her. And she's been a reference for many of my future career opportunities. So I guess in terms of introducing myself, I guess I'll just start at the beginning. Grew up in the Bay Area. Went to college on the East Coast at Cornell. Did a couple internships in HR and also consulting, and then felt bad that I didn't study abroad. So I decided to go to India for a year to work for Mahindra and Mahindra in business strategy and operations. Came back during the financial crisis in, I want to say it was 2012, could not find a job for a year, was very devastated out of college. I know you wouldn't guess that from my LinkedIn profile, but that was the case. And then I started working at Franklin Templeton Investments in a rotational investment management program in the Bay Area. One of my friends was in tech. He worked as a software engineer at LinkedIn. And he was like, what are you doing? Why are you waking up at 6 in the morning? Why are you working these trading hours? You're in the Bay Area. It's the center of tech. And he said, I'm just going to throw your resume in and, you can learn on the job. So that's how I landed my first role at LinkedIn. Did not know SQL, but got a job on the insights team, had to learn trial by fire. Was at LinkedIn for about 3 years and worked across all of their different B2B products. I'm doing data analytics and also working with some of the largest clients and building internal tools. And that's how I discovered product management. I then moved to Twitch. I've always been kind of an avid gamer casually, so working at Twitch was really a dream job, but I joined there as a senior product manager to work on the Twitch Insights product. So made a lot of sense coming from LinkedIn Insights to build out game analytics and insights for different game developers, mod authors, and also worked on extensions, kind of like apps on Twitch for a bit. After Twitch, I moved over to Pinterest. They recruited me on LinkedIn to work on the foundation of their creator platform. So I worked on everything related to Pinner creator engagement. So if you used Pinterest, you probably touched a lot of things I worked on. They used to have a falling feed, creator recommendations, comments, tries, reactions, all of the above, which was a lot of fun because creators, I guess creator economy was just kind of up and coming in that point in time. From Pinterest, I moved to SoundCloud. They also recruited me on LinkedIn, and I joined as the director of product for the creator to fan group. They actually made a special position for me because I really just loved working on kind of the ecosystem. I didn't want to pick just creators and listeners. So I'm so very grateful for them. And as part of that, I was supposed to move to Berlin. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because it was the exact timing of COVID. So I worked in California remote, but for a while I got up at, I want to say 3 a.m. and then eventually it switched to 6 a.m. So it was a bit rough, but made it work. And then from SoundCloud, SoundCloud, it was amazing. It was my first time leading a team. We worked on monetization, insights, royalties, and any way we could engage with creators on SoundCloud. So a lot of really cool stuff. Then I moved over to Top GG is the CEO, was a small company and grew the company from, I guess I was number 4, and then we grew it to 12, I think it was 12 to 14 people at its largest. And Top GG is the largest discovery platform for Discord servers and bots. And we're exploring kind of adding in other verticals such as Minecraft or Roblox, or even launch some kind of Web3 discovery prototypes. I was honestly scared shitless because it was my first time being a CEO, but I learned so much. I've never worked harder than that in my entire life. Now I'm taking a bit of, I call it a sabbatical, but I guess I'm very clearly a workaholic. So I say I'm working towards my sabbatical. So I actually haven't taken any time off. I launched my kind of advising and coaching business just because I've gotten so much inbound from it. So it's been nice to, work, but not necessarily work the crazy hours, nights and weekends I was doing before, and kind of be empowered to pick my clients. And it's been a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh. You have an incredible resume. I just have to put
Oh,
that
thanks.
out there. Also, so many of the companies that you mentioned are like companies I love. I'm not a gamer by any means, but I feel like everybody knows Twitch. Same with Pinterest. Like even if you don't use Pinterest, you
Yeah.
know what it is. You know the purpose. You know all the girlies are on Pinterest. And when I we just did a kitchen renovation recently, and I was all over
Oh yes,
Pinterest.
love that.
But today, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. Today we're talking about toxic work environments, and you've had a lot of different experiences in different industries and different even roles, right? You mentioned you've like had different career pivots as well. So really excited to have you share a little bit more with us about toxic work environments. Before we even get into like your stories and your
Mhm.
experiences, help us understand like how you define toxic work environment.
So I think that has changed over the years. I would say that toxic work environment can mean so many things, and so much of your definition is based on your own experience or what you've read, et cetera. And I would read some articles and just be like, how could that happen at work? You read about like this sexual harassment, or you read about people yelling at the office or just doing horrible things. And of course I believe, the people who have survived it and are speaking out of it, but it's sometimes until you experience it, it's hard to just understand how much that can affect you and others individually. And I would say, really at the core now, a toxic environment could be anywhere where you don't feel psychologically safe. I
Mm,
would say that's kind of my root definition, but anywhere where, you're feeling uncomfortable, or people are doing kind of inappropriate things that are taking kind of your space and time, or also stepping on your boundaries. I mean, these could be kind of around like literally physical boundaries, which we'll get into. These could
mhm.
also just be more kind of communication boundaries around different topics, et cetera, or things that are kind of affecting your mental and emotional health. If you're just kind of questioning yourself or feeling uncomfortable and not able to focus on your work, I think that's a good barometer.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I mean, it's again, we'll get into the examples of what you've had to endure, but I think you make a good point. When you're in it, sometimes you may not even realize, like, is this toxic or am I crazy?
Mhm.
So, and there's obviously nuance, right? Like, and there's a spectrum of toxicity, which we'll cover. And we've all heard sort of like the stories, the horror stories, right? From
Yeah.
Hollywood, the Weinsteins. We also heard, at least I've watched like the Uber documentary
Mhm.
of how when the Uber started scaling and that environment under Travis Kalanick, how it wasn't very healthy, right? To say the least. And I think the common thread there is that certain, which without making it about gender too much, but it's almost like an imbalance of power, right? And unfortunately, in certain industries that are very male dominated, women unfortunately become victims to some of this harassment, and almost like this like quid pro quo, right? Like, oh yeah, sure, you can get promoted if you do this
Mhm.
and this for me. And so but again, so there's such a spectrum. So Kristin, for you to share some of these experiences that you've had firsthand, like if you could give us some examples of what are we talking about here that you had to experience?
Absolutely. And before I dive into it, I wanted to call out some good points you made, right? It's like that power imbalance is so important to take note of in a corporate work environment, right? And you might see shades of, bullying, harassment, discrimination, et cetera. And so it's really important to, take note of that, and especially note the power imbalance, or, note that there are groups of folks who are underrepresented, and that can cause kind of huge misbalances and power dynamics. And so I guess to get into it, lots of different stories, no particular order, but I am going to start what's in the gaming industry. I think that's, there's just been so many articles that it's just, sadly a well-known fact, that there is a lot of discrimination, harassment, in the gaming industry. And I think I was hoping to be one of the people who could change that a little bit. And I'm also not saying, not all folks in gaming are bad. There's just so many wonderful people of all genders who are trying to fix that. But there are just, pockets and different stories and experiences. So I can first talk about one hard thing was, another product manager and I were reporting to a manager who had an engineering background. I don't know how much all that really mattered, but I think just some things we went through there were really frustrating. This manager was Caucasian and his wife was Asian, and he would kind of make weird comments to me and the other PM who were Chinese about like how he knew so much about Chinese food, or like he would call his wife a child and just kind of talk about her in a demeaning way. So you mentioned, right, like how do you see if something's toxic? Like both of us were kind of like, wait, whoa, these comments, like on their own, they might not seem that horrible, but like together, like, hey, we're feeling a little uncomfortable. What's going on? I guess I did give him feedback directly, which maybe wasn't a good idea, because then he kind of started retaliating. I also went, to the VP, and one of my friends gave me some great advice, where a lot of women, sometimes when you speak up, you get accused of being emotional or unhinged, et cetera. So she said, okay, why don't you write down, hey, here's what happened, here's how it made me feel, and here's the business impact. So I kind of offer that framework a lot to, friends or my coaching clients when you're going through a difficult situation. I think it could be applicable for anyone because, here's what happened. It's the facts, no emotions. Here's how it made me feel. No one can argue with how it made you feel. It's your feelings. Then, hey, take it seriously. Here's the impact on the business. So, I did kind of speak up about it. And I think the unfortunate thing was they launched a HR investigation into me because I spoke up,
Mm.
and other people were also speaking up against the manager, and they were speaking, and they kind of investigated all of us. And it was one of the worst periods of my life because I was like, I need to make sure my work is A plus. And then also, I think I feel lucky because he actually called someone and told them that he was going to get me fired, and I was emotional and unhinged. Luckily, I think at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? Like, I spoke up. Like, I always like to do things where I know I can go to sleep at night. And I was like, I spoke up for myself. I spoke up for how other people were being treated. So did others. And at the end of the day, like, if they don't do anything, I can choose to leave, or I can choose to go to another team. Right. So it took me a long time to cope with that. But it's also frustrating because you almost are like, wait, I'm the victim. Why am I bending over backwards? And unfortunately, a lot of other things happened too, where, I was able to give this keynote. One of the employees on another team who had a girlfriend, by the way, and he was just like, oh, you're so fuckable right now. And then I was like, oh my God, this is the last thing I want to hear after. It's supposed to be one of the happiest days of my career. I gave this big keynote speech. We're celebrating all these things. And I was just like, holy shit. I mean, people asked me why I left. And I was like, that was literally the moment where I was like, I can't work here anymore. Like, or one of the big moments where I was like, I need to leave. And I was just like, and I did talk to some people out in HR, and they're just like, drugs and alcohol. And I was like, that's not an excuse. Like, if I drink, I'm not going around saying that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that was just, shocking to me. And then another, I mean, there's a lot, but another incident was like, there was this person, product manager in our group, and he would just, all of the women would talk about it. He would imagine there's class conference rooms, and he would just be staring at all the women, or like staring at our chest. When you can feel someone looking at you,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's like all of them were like, this is horrible. And then he would like come up right behind you on your desk and like put his hand, like at the
Wow.
cubicle. And like, we did have a one-on-ones, and then he literally put his hand like on my thigh, and I was like, no, excuse me. It was just like shocking. But let me pause
Wow.
there.
Yeah, well, I'm
Crazy.
first of all, yeah, this is insane. I feel almost like sheltered in my world. Like, first of all, sorry that you had to go through that. And I'm feeling like a bunch of emotions right now, rage, anger. How do these people think they can get away with it? Unfortunately, I guess there's just no consequences and no repercussions,
Mm.
which we want to change that. And it takes people like you, unfortunately, like you
Mhm.
had to go through it, but for you to then speak up and
Mhm.
raise awareness, I mean, that's incredible.
Mhm.
But first of all, just this sucks that you had to go through all of that.
I know, and I want to, sorry, let me interject. There are just a couple instances in talking about this I realized I didn't mention. And I do want to mention, maybe it's more positive instance where I saw someone, in this environment, and never been like screamed at in a meeting before. But it's happened. And I remember there was one person who was a leader, and we kind of saw him developing this toxic behavior. And then I did pull him aside once, and I was like, hey, I think, when you reacted like this, it was a little inappropriate. And he just apologized, felt horrible. And I wanted to share that story because I think sometimes, I think it's hard to just put people in a box if they're good and bad. But when you have a toxic environment, some people just end up going to the lowest common denominator. And I think he was shocked and
Mm.
was like, I'm so sorry. And so I do think that's why it's important to speak up. You don't know how someone's going to react. And
Yeah.
also, yeah, you have to protect yourself at the end of the day. But I did want to share that story. And then there were a couple other stories that came to mind where, I remember I was in this meeting, and, we were trying to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Like, that's something I just speak up about a lot, whether it's building a product or just in a culture. And I remember there was another product manager who was, he was a person of color. And then we were both the only people who were people of color. And then I think someone in the meeting, or the leader at the time, was like, oh, like, Kristin, this was a big meeting. Kristin, can you tell me the definition about diversity, equity, inclusion? I only know it as it applies to veterans. Can you just explain it for everyone? And I think, some people are like, oh, what's wrong with that? But I do want to say that, I mean, I think from both your professions, you understand, right? It's like, why are you singling me out to ask that in front of everyone? And then
Mm-hmm.
also, when I was leaving, they kind of put my position on the board and said this was a giant meeting, and said it was open. And then they were like, oh, we need more diverse candidates. I'll like buy someone a nice dinner. And then we were like, and then people were like, oh, like, how nice of a dinner? And it was just like, wait, are you just
Mm,
tokenizing? Like, I don't know, it almost became a joke. It just felt so gross. So I wanted to
yeah.
bring those examples up of a toxic work environment because they are, a little, it's a little more subtle in a sense versus physical. Um,
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But it's good to have sort of an idea, right? Because it doesn't
Yeah.
just mean physical, it doesn't just mean one thing or the other. It can be, again, like this whole
Mm.
spectrum. So this is good food for thought. Okay, clearly you've gone through so much. What, in summary, sort of has been the impact on your mental health,
Oh my
your
God.
well-being, your productivity, all the things?
So I think it's been really bad impact on my mental health. And, I spent a lot of time in therapy. And I almost felt like I didn't even know myself anymore. But I think for me personally, I was like, oh my gosh, like who am I? Or like, what do I believe? Or it just makes your imposter syndrome completely flare up. And so I think for me, it's hard, and I've talked to some friends about this where like, I would say in gaming, crypto, like I'm a little bit different, right? And stand out, but that also comes with some consequences, but that also comes with some cool things, right? Or maybe it was nice for me to feel like, oh, I can change this, I can uplift more women or other underrepresented people, but I also have to deal with all the shit, right? Um,
Mm,
and so I guess, right, I think over time, I personally have just become so burnt out. And so many people in my life, even Sabrina's been like, Kristin, you need to take a break, right? And sometimes when you're in it, you just can't see it. And so many people
mm,
since church have been like, Kristin, you've been going at 200 miles an hour. If you don't take a break, your body's going to take the break for you. And then it was also what kind of woke me up was my mom had a really big operation on her to remove a tumor from her pancreas. And it kind of woke me up in a sense and was like, wait, like, why am I self-selecting into these toxic situations and like obsessed with work and all these things when
mm,
there's just so much more to life. Or one thing she brings up a lot is the regrets of the dying. I think it's a book that a hospice nurse wrote, and one of them she always reminds me about is, I wish I never worked so much. It's hard. Someone asked me, they're like, would you do it all over again? And it rocket launched my career. But,
mm,
there was clearly a cost to
Yeah.
it. And so it's hard because my gut reaction, I think some people want me to say like, oh, it's not worth it. But, for me, I was like, it kind of made me who I am. So I do embrace it a bit. And, those horrible things that happen, but the positive I can take from it is, to speak up about it, share. And I'm just hoping other people can learn from my mistakes and I can just look back on them and say, hey, that just sucked that it happened. But what
mm.
can I change going forward? Or what kind of positive things can I do or not do and be more careful about?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where you can't necessarily change the past, but you could change like how you view it, how you like take care of these situations moving forward, protecting yourself, protecting others around you. And so just really appreciate you being so open and honest and vulnerable here because I know that these are things that are frankly like unsettling, like uncomfortable. They're sad and they're like it just honestly triggered me. Like as you were speaking to your story, I was
Mm.
so upset. I was so angry. And Sabrina, would love to also hear your perspective too, because I've had situations previously in smaller companies, like more startup-y environment,
Mhm.
where it was very similar. Not only was I overworked and there was a weird culture where everybody was kind of doing that, so you can't really speak up because that's the norm. I've had managers who like take my work, criticize it, but then like present it as if it's their own. Like there's just a lot of weird things like that that at the time, maybe part of it is like I was younger, I've never seen it before. So I think that maybe that is just the culture at this company. But now looking back, like similar to what you mentioned, looking back, I'm like, it actually taught me a lot about what I am willing and not willing to take when it
Mhm.
comes to like these types of behavior. And I do think like Sabrina, I do think like being at LinkedIn, like it's just so different, right? There's obviously it's nothing's perfect, but it is not that extreme. And so it is so crazy for me to hear those types of stories now. Um, and I even like as you're reflecting on how it impacted you, your productivity, you as a person and how you've evolved and the trauma that now comes with you is just so relatable. Like I remember when I left that startup to come work at LinkedIn, my manager at the time was asking me why was I so not confident in my work. And like
Mm,
you how do you be confident when you've constantly been
mm,
criticized, your work being taken, and you know, like with that background, it explains why certain people come in with certain behavior,
mhm.
but that's like their coping mechanism. So yeah, it's just all I'm trying to say is it's very, very relatable. And yeah, it sucks that you've had to go through that.
Mhm.
Um, can I dig a little bit more
Yeah.
around the like subtle toxicity? Because I think like many of the stories that you talked about are very obvious and they're
Mhm,
blatant. And I think we generally as people know that those are the wrong things to do, right? But there's also little things that could happen. It could be comments. It could be the
mhm,
example where you shared where somebody called you out and say, "Hey, can you explain dibs?" Right?
mhm,
Like it's
mhm,
things like that where it's like it's still professional, but is it professional? Right? Or even like managers like management style. It
mhm.
could be that you just wanted a manager that's not a micromanager, but your manager happened to be a micromanager. So like there's conflict of the way you know you want to be managed. So talk to us a little bit more about like those types of situations. How do you distinguish things like constructive
Mhm.
criticism versus this person's like bullying you, for example?
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up because I think that one thing I talk about in a lot of my coaching, especially for women, is that women are often given subjective feedback instead of objective feedback. So, a couple
Mm,
examples, some are a little more blatant than others, but I had I want to say like a really smart, kind manager. It was his first time being a manager. He also had a engineering background. So, he's learning. I get it. I've had a lot of first time managers, unfortunately. I think that has made me a better leader because I was like, hey, this is what I don't want to do. But, one thing that I think was really frustrating for me is he didn't like my communication style. And I think he didn't like it because it was so different than his. And then
right.
there were two comments that were made. One was he kept saying I was talking too much during presentations. And I was like, everyone has given me feedback that I'm a great presenter. I also have a ton of speaking experience. Like, I can take feedback, but you need to give feedback. Then he said, you have to write out exactly what you want to say on the slide, one sentence, and I have to approve all of it. And so, as you said, right, super micromanaging. And some people might feel like, oh, he's just being a manager. And I was like, no, this is subjective feedback. Like, I'm not okay with this. You don't know. It depends on how, like, the environment you were raised in. So about this feedback where they were like, oh, Kristin, you really need to control your face if you disagree with something, or someone we know you didn't like that idea, but you need to control face. And I was like, wait a second, this other product manager is literally screaming at people in the meetings and really aggressive. If I speak up, why am I getting this feedback? And they were like, well, that's just his personality. It's just shocking coming from you because everyone thinks you're usually like really nice. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think those subtle things are you you catch them later, but oftentimes, when you're more inexperienced, you're like, wait, oh, I didn't say something in the moment, but that was wrong. Or what
right.
what the heck, right?
It sounds like part of it is like trusting your gut. Like if this
Mhm.
one doesn't feel
Mm.
right, think about it somewhat. Like
Mhm.
don't just let it pass
Yeah.
because, right?
Mm.
But the second thing, and it sounds like you kind of started to use that as
Mhm.
the process is, would this happen to somebody else? Would this
Yes.
happen to like if I'm a woman, I would think about would this happen to a
Mhm.
man? If I
Mhm.
was a younger employee, I would ask,
Yeah.
would this happen to a more tenured employee, right? Like you can ask similar questions about
Mhm.
different scenarios. And if the answer is like, no, they would not have treated or said these things to this
Mhm.
other employee. And this is not about performance. This is like these offhand comments, right? If they wouldn't have said that to somebody
Mhm.
else, then maybe something is wrong there. It's
Yeah.
worth looking into. Is that like a fair summary
Mhm.
of like what your experience was?
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
I think I would say in a lot of my coaching conversations now, it's like it takes time to be able to trust your gut
Yeah.
opinion. And I think it also sometimes has to do with culture or upbringing. A lot of people I work with are, Asian women, immigrants, and sometimes when you're younger, you're taught to just or at least in my upbringing, it's like suck it. My mom's Cantonese and Cantonese culture, it's like, suck it up. Who has time to be
Hmm.
depressed? You don't need to go on vacation. Like suck it up and just push through the pain. Like you don't need praise. And so it can feel awkward to advocate for yourself. So I do think trusting your gut and intuition is a learned skill, but also it's hard because these are scary topics to talk about. And, it's like, who can you trust to talk about it
Yeah.
outside of work and at work? Yeah.
I'm Chinese as well. And I just know there's so many situations where I didn't feel like something was right. I share that with my family, and my family would share things like, and they mean it, they don't mean it in a bad way,
Mhm.
right? They mean it as like, oh, you should be like totally grateful that you have such a stable job, you have such a well-paying job. And I would always remind my family, like, just because I have a well-paying job doesn't mean I should be dealing with XYZ issues. Like, that's still
Mhm.
not okay. And I think I want to remind people, because I think that happens a lot where people are like, oh, just be grateful in this economy that you have a job. Like,
Mhm.
no, what you're experiencing is still wrong. Like,
Yeah.
you may need this job, and that's also fair, but it can happen simultaneously.
I was like, I want to be able to sleep at night. Like, I don't know. It's funny. I was talking to my brother-in-law and he was like, hey, like you shouldn't burn bridges. And I was like, I actually really disagree. I used to agree with that in the
Mm,
past, but I'm like, if someone is doing something really inappropriate, toxic, wrong, potentially illegal, these kind of things, like I was like, I have no problem burning the bridge. Or so many people worry, right, about, oh, like this person hates me or they're gonna say bad stuff about me. And I was like, oh no, like I know that the CEO of this one company really does not like me. And he's even gone so far as to like call up advisors of companies I was working with and all these things to kind of bash me. And like, if someone wants to listen to what you're saying about me, I don't want to work with them anyways. And so I do
mm-hmm.
throw that out there because, right, I don't think it's always black and white, right? It's like, do you have to burn the bridge or not? Of course, I'd love to work out things amicably, but with some people,
Sure.
right, you just have to speak up and like kind of stand your ground. And I think so many
Yeah.
times people are like, oh, I don't want to burn the bridge. I can't say anything. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Can we spend a little bit of time on work-life balance? Because I think, to your point, like when we initially opened this conversation, we talked about how toxic work environment can manifest in very, very different
Mhm.
ways. There's a lot of like the conversations about like assault, all of that, I think completely fair, but particularly around work-life balance. This is
Yes.
something that many of us have the luxury to choose, right? Like we can choose to go to a different company. We choose to
Mhm.
go to a startup or to go to whatever company. Um, Talk to us about what your perspective is when it comes to work-life balance. Is that something we choose? Is that something that we just kind of follow the culture
Mhm.
of that company, right? You mentioned startups is one of
Yeah.
some like experiences. And at what point does it need to be within our control to then just leave? Because that is not a priority for us anymore.
Yeah. So this question, it's gonna maybe my response is polarizing, or it's a hard question for me because I think one of the things that I've been struggling with is my career and identity just like melded together and I just made it everything.
Mm,
I guess I don't know where it stems from. I was trying to unpack this recently, like with my therapist, friends and stuff, and I wonder maybe part of it is my dad. I'll start with this and then I will answer the question. But I was like, my dad was very successful, grew up from nothing, like immigrant from Jamaica, went and did his undergrad, master's, PhD, all on scholarship. And then, he retired when he was 39. His last company was Juniper Networks, but this guy just worked his ass off. And he always told me, he's like, Kristen, it's a luxury that you even get to talk about work-life balance, or it's a luxury you get to work on something you love. He was like, for me, it was survival. As I mature, I'm like, there's a cost to everything. And so my view on work-life balance is it's sit back and think about what your priorities are in life. Like I used to kind of just be like, oh, my career is separate from my life and personal life and career is separate. And I'm like, no, it all comes down to time. You have a limited amount of
mhm,
time. And then of course there's resources, et cetera. But where are you choosing to spend your time and does that reflect your priorities? And that's one of the reasons I was like, okay, I need to take a break because, when my mom was sick, I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to spend time with my mom. Or if something happened, I was like, I would literally feel horrible. I was just like going to Taiwan every quarter because my last job or working all these nights and weekends. Or if I did spend time with them, I was a zombie, right? It's like I would kind of lie to myself and say, oh no, I'm spending time with them. I'm present. I have work life balance. I was a zombie. And I was
mm.
still like I'm sure I was annoying everyone. Like I would like look at my phone or be all exhausted or on edge. Everything's gonna be a compromise and trade off.
And sorry,
Yeah.
just to chime in here, I
Yeah.
think you make a great point, and we actually had another episode on this career enmeshment, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Of separating your identity from your career. But that is one of the biggest life lessons I've learned. And I know, Kristen, you're going through it now, and I'm so
Yeah.
proud of you for taking a step back from your career. But just the amount of time, yes, we dedicate to work. And at the end of the day, like we look back and I've heard so many people say their biggest regrets is like having focused too much on work versus other things that bring you joy. So,
Mhm.
I think it's just such a critical reminder for everyone to take a look at themselves and yeah, try to see like, am I working because I love it or because I am, I'm just trying to prove something and trying to go the extra mile, but not actually feeling really invested in it, or at what cost, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It was like, why? And it took me so long to admit, what I was sharing about almost like competing with my dad, like this weird immigrant guilt, right?
Mhm.
Like my parents are like, why are you doing this? Like, and then I would get this, it's like, I was like, wait, aren't you proud of me for getting these jobs? And they were like, why are you not having a family right now? And I was like, excuse me, what? Right. So or my mom was like, we didn't work so hard to see you stressed out like this. Like, what on earth are
Yeah.
you doing? And I think I realized I was like, oh my gosh, I have no boundaries. Like work is just all of my action, right? It's like your actions speak louder than words. All my actions are just putting work up here. My mom came in and she's like, hey, get up. Like if you can't do it for yourself, do it for all the women who wish they could become CEOs, do it for all the little Asian girls out there, like get up out of bed and like get to it. And I was like, okay.
It's actually like really refreshing to hear because I find that oftentimes like for us, like our situation where we're lucky enough to be able to choose a different job, we have the skills, we have the financial stability to go seek a different job or to quit a job. I often find that like ultimately it is my fault. And this is actually something like I think there's a lot of toxic situations that are not the fault of the victim. But work-life balance is one of those things where I'm like, I actually have a good amount of control over how I prioritize my life. And I'm guilty of the same. Like I will certainly put work above of family, friends, whatever, or even just myself. And um I've had regrets and now I'm trying to more proactively be the decision maker of that rather than letting my peers how long they work or my manager like their expectation dictate how I end up working. But it was just very refreshing to hear that like you're taking ownership of this
Mhm.
work-life balance issue that we've all probably experienced to some degree.
With all of this, though, I feel like so much, again, is having the courage, which you have really shown, but that's not easy, right? And like, I think so many women and so many people, minorities, right? Like people of color are in those really toxic situations and they may not want to speak up, right? Because again, there's so much pressure. I have to keep my job. I have to feed my family, things like that. So what would you say to someone, and what advice would you give to someone to be able to speak up without the fear of retaliation?
Yeah, so I have advice, and then I also want to give another story about a situation where I waited a very long time to speak up.
Mm,
That was actually it was like more recent, or later in my career. So I think first on the fear of retaliation, it's more of right sitting back and saying, what do I like? Why do I want to speak up, or why is it important? Right? What kind of positive impact can it have, and what negative impact can it have? And sometimes you might need to sit down and write it out and talk through it with
mhm,
people. But I think for me, and everyone's different, for me, I'm very big on, I don't want to live my life and look back and say, oh, I wish I spoke up, or if I had spoken up, it could have helped someone else. And but I was just like, you know what? I can only control my actions. I can't control others' actions. If
mhm,
someone's going to retaliate, and like that's a risk I'm okay with taking and I will have to deal with it. I can't control whether or not they do that. Just like let's say, people talking shit about you, right? I think it says more about them than about you. And I think that it's hard. Like some people have talked to me about toxic situations with their manager and they're like, "Oh my God, Kristen, like what if like they go and say all these bad things about me or I can never ask for reference, this and this and this." And I was like, hey, a lot of people, for the most part, I think don't have a good relationship with their manager. From everything I heard, it's like, it's good managers are hard to find. I know this is a quote used a lot, but it's like, okay, rejection is just redirection. I'm like, at the end of the day, like the retaliation, right? It is a risk you have to take. But, if you feel you did the right thing, like you'll figure out how to deal with it. And it's like, I imagine, or I hope for most people, it's like the people who love and care about you or who you've worked with, like, are going to have your back in that case.
Mhm.
mhm,
So I think that's, just silly quotes. Like, it's like, okay, you can't, like, you're always going to have some haters. It took me a long time. I was such a people pleaser to some degree that I struggle with saying know sometimes in people pleasing, maybe we all do, but it's like you just have to accept like not everyone's gonna like you. You might have a distinct style, and that's, if you try to form yourself into something that everyone gets along with, like you're not gonna be special or like spiky anymore. Like you're not even gonna know yourself. So I think for me, I'm like, I'm acting in accordance to my values, and if that's gonna piss someone off, I don't give a fuck.
I think you make such great points, and also a reminder that this is a journey, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't just that something happened and immediately you were speaking
Yeah.
up. And for people to really, I think another big thing, and you talked about this, is like documenting everything,
Mhm.
right? Like documenting your examples, and then really making a case. But I think still, though, as I look at my network and some of the incredible people I've had the pleasure of working with, a lot of times they just don't feel safe to speak up. So,
Yes.
and it was something that I'm really invested in as a white woman with a lot of privilege. Like, how can I be a better ally to people
Mhm.
that may not feel confident and comfortable to speak up, right? So, in your experience, because I know there's a lot of talk about allyship, right? And like, oh, I want to be a better ally.
Mhm.
But really, though, like, what is helpful and what is not,
Yeah.
like, in your experience?
So, thank you for that and being willing to have the conversation. I think it's an uncomfortable thing, to talk about. So, okay, couple examples. I will share an example of earlier in my career where someone on our team had shared that this really horrible, thing. Someone said a really horrible thing to her at kind of a company event. And she shared it with me, and then I was kind of like, okay, this is really bad. And then I was like, hey, would you be comfortable if she didn't want to say anything, but I was like, would you be comfortable if I said something to, sales director and like our director? I really think this is not okay and not what the company values. And then like they did do something about it. So I felt like that was important because I know sometimes it's just like you don't want to put more pressure on the victim or someone who just went through that. It's really emotional and hard, but she was okay with me speaking up. So I was like, let me go handle it, right? Take some of the burden off of her, made sure she was okay. Another example was, I was a director there and a leader. And I think one thing that I think about a lot is like, when you don't say something, that shows that you don't care or it's not important to you. So it like I wanted to be very clear I was proactive. And so when those things were happening, like I did try to, talk with, leaders who were more well versed in these subjects than me, like different community folks, leaders. And then I did put together messaging and send to the team proactively because I was like, I'm sending a message that this is important and I care and I'm here to like be an ally and support. And also, behavior that is, discriminatory is not going to be tolerated. Right. So I think it's a part as a leader to proactively create that safe environment. And a lot of people privately reach out and they were like, thank you for saying something where it's like other people didn't. Right. I think that's very important. I think speaking up is really important. Or also when something's happening live, like something at one company, we're working on something and there was a comment that was a bit racially charged made. And then I panicked a little in the moment. And then I was like, okay, like I am one leader, so like I need to collect myself. And then I was like, hey, I need to interject and pause. Like, let's talk about what just happened live. I didn't want to wait till I was like, oh, do I wait till after I send out email? And I was like, no, no, okay, I'm going to talk about what happened live, and then I can send something out after. And I think I was terrified, honestly, because I was like, I don't want to mess up, but I was like, no, I need like the safety of team members who might be affected by this. And our culture is so much more important. I'm not going to assume intention, but we need to call out that it's wrong. Otherwise, people think it's acceptable. So I think that's important to be an ally.
This is a really good kind of segue into one of the areas that we were curious about, which is like, yes, you can have allies, you can have people who are helping you, helping you speak up, right? Like if you're the victim going through it. But one thing is talking to HR.
Mhm.
This is something that I'm personally kind of torn about. And you also gave an example previously about how HR ended up investigating you and the people who like
Mhm.
raised the concern. So I also know that there's a lot of conversations around like, oh, HR is there to actually protect the company and to like cover the legal basis. So talk to us about like what your experience is, and also because you've been a leader and you've been a
Yeah.
C-suite, so you've seen it from different perspectives.
Mhm.
What would be your recommendation for somebody who may be going through it,
Mhm.
and yeah, how to navigate the relationship with HR?
Oh my gosh. So this is hard. It's something I struggle with, and I have to say, I hate giving this as an answer, but it's like I think it's so it depends on the situation, but I am going to talk through what it might depend on to help people, maybe have a little framework to deal with. So I would
Okay.
say, let's say you're going through, this, like, you're like, oh my gosh, something is happening. It's not great. Recommendation is on your personal computer or device, personal email, whatever, just start a document and track, hey, like this inappropriate thing was said, or screenshot of this, right? You can just track time and date what it said, use that framework of here's what happened, here's how it made me feel, impact on the business. As far as HR goes, it's very hard, right?
Mm.
And so I think that, that statement of HR, isn't on your side, it's there to protect the company. I think that's true. Um, I
Mhm.
don't think it's, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they are there to protect the company and like navigate things with you. And so I would say, depending on how serious something is, like there's no harm in, talking to people outside the company, or maybe people you trust at the company. You got to be careful who you can trust at the company too, right? But talking to people outside the company or at the company, but it's always good to talk to, let's say you have a friend in HR but they don't work at your company. Maybe they can give you that perspective, or, you can do a consult. I think people are scared of reaching out to lawyers. And I'm like, I know it sucks and it's kind of old school. I have a friend
Mhm.
who's working at a company, James, who is trying to figure this out. But like, it's kind of hard to just get in touch with a lawyer and scary, but you can email employment lawyers and just ask them for a consult, and some will have a call with you for free. Some will say, oh, it's $1,000 an hour, right? Don't do those. Just, you can talk about your situation and at least get some knowledge, right? From a legal
Mhm.
perspective. And so I
Mhm.
think the biggest thing for this question is you need to kind of understand, right, the situation and understand your options. But I think at the end of the day, you take a step back and be like, okay, what outcome do I want? Right? Okay, here's potential outcomes. So what outcome do I want? Is it worth talking to HR or saying
Mhm.
something? And I say this because it depends on your own situation, right? Or how you feel. Like some people are like, you know what, I want to leave. I've heard of people who leave and that they're like, actually, that was wrong. I am gonna still bring this up, right? So
Mm.
it's just such a personal decision. I think if you do decide to talk to HR, I think one thing rule that I live by is at the end of the day, who is the decision maker? There have been other things where, like, let's say I was a leader at a company, and then someone on my team told me about harassment. Like, I
Mhm.
view myself kind of as I know, like, legally, I don't know the legals around, but that term mandated report. I'm like, wait, if someone on my team comes to me and says they're being harassed, like, I was like, I'm happy to handle this very privately, but it's very inappropriate. Like, I do need to make sure you're safe, and we have to say something to HR, right? Um,
Mm.
so I do
Yeah.
think there's some areas where I'm like, okay, this is so bad. Like, like I have to say something and let HR handle it. And I think what
Right.
sucks is you don't know. I think there's some people who are going to handle it, some people are not, but sometimes HR's hands are tied, right? One of the pieces of advice that I got on how to be a CEO, and he was saying, you're going to have all these decisions of where you you might have this really toxic person, but they contribute so much to the company. And
Right.
then you have like what the right thing is, and that's going to be a big kind of question you have to navigate. And I guess we were not talking about this context when we were talking about that, but I do reference that because it's like, there's so much gray area, and what is leadership going to do at the end of the day? You don't know. So I think the
Yeah.
biggest thing is, you know, and not all stories, a lot of stories don't have happy endings, right? Like nothing happens.
That's, I think, a really great reminder that finding that decision maker outside of just HR, right? Because to your point, sometimes their hands might be tied, and
Mhm.
who's ultimately in charge. Um, it's I know that's easier said than done, right? Because maybe again, you don't know who the decision maker is, or you don't have a relationship, but at least maybe find someone that you feel comfortable with that is close to the decision maker if you can't actually get to that decision maker.
Mhm.
And I mean, again, I know this is like utopia, but I do think the more people speak up and the more sort of we can have these types of conversations, I believe that there could be a world of companies having that zero tolerance policy that we had at LinkedIn. I've seen it
Mhm.
firsthand where my coworker, who
Yes.
was a person of color, was named very bad and mean words, and it was by a person who had a lot of power. And at
Mm.
the end of the day, though, they fired that guy. And I just think those are examples that are obviously they don't
Yeah.
we can come across often,
I
but
love that about LinkedIn. I remember
yeah,
that too. Someone did something inappropriate and they'd get walked out. And I was like, this can happen. This can be real
Yeah.
at a company.
This is a good segue though into this next question. Sort of after you've tried it all, right? You've tried to talk to decision maker, tried to talk to HR, and things are just not changing. Like, where is the line in terms of when do you leave? Like, when do you just give up? And I know you,
Mhm.
Kristen, you are so committed and dedicated to your work, and you enjoy your work, and you really are in it. But like, right, it gets hard.
Oh,
I
it's
get
like a
one
double-edged
boss.
sword.
So
Yeah, it's
yeah, when do
actually
you
really
leave?
bad because it's like I'm willing to like almost hurt myself or cause more trauma to stay in this situation. And
Right.
no, that's a yeah, it's like where is the line for that? And I get asked this so much, right? When do you leave? Whether it's a job or, abusive relationship, it's so hard when you're in it. And I always remind people, I'm like, yes, you can get a lot of advice, but at the end of the day, you have all the pieces and you have the most context about that. So like let's work to try to figure out where your gut is. And one thing I say too, it's like for most people, I know this isn't 100%, but I'll ask them like, did you ever regret not leaving earlier? Like most people say, "Oh, I wish I left earlier when the
Hmm.
situation is toxic," but I understand it takes time to leave. And I think I would say that, when you realize that it's having this profound impact on your life, right? Whatever that toxic situation, like you will, when I've been in those situations, it starts eating up my whole life or it eats at you, right? You're trying to have fun and it'll just pop in your brain, or you realize like, it's like, okay, maybe this was 5% mind share at work, but now it's like 20, 50. I just can't, it's eating at me, eating at me, eating at me. My guilt is growing. I think then it's important to kind of say, is it worth it? Is this, and it's an opportunity cost. Is this amount of money I'm making worth it? Are these career gains worth it? What am I giving up? Am I giving up my mental health? Am I giving up my peace? Am I actually hurting myself even more by staying? And I remember I would sometimes tell my sister and her husband stories about what I was experiencing at the startups, and they were like, I was like laughing about it. And I remember they were like, Kristen, that is harassment. That is sexual harassment. Like, that's not funny. And I was like, oh. And then they were like, my sister's like, you could never pay me enough money to deal with that ever. And I
Mm.
think I was like, damn, I become so jaded. I always advise making a plan, right? You're thinking about leaving. It's like, hey, just make a plan to leave. You don't have to leave. Just make a plan. What would that look like? What do you want to do next? You want to take a break? Do you feel comfortable while you're interviewing here, interviewing for another job and then getting that
Mhm.
job, then taking a break? What works for you? Sometimes people are just like, I'm in such a bad situation, like I need to leave and then I'll interview, and I'm okay with the financial impact of that. Right. And I do want
Mhm.
to recognize privilege here. For a lot of people, like they need a paycheck. It's a privileged thing to be able to leave and not have those like consequences, et cetera. So I think that you really have to look at your like financial situation and leaving too. I know some people are just like, wait, why are you staying? Just leave. It's like, well, that's not a reality for the majority of people. And sometimes you just need a little kick, or you need a friend to like sit down with you and say, okay, let's make a plan and get you out of here. Right. Like
Yeah.
my sister and best friend did that for me with, toxic relationships, but and other friends have kind of commented to me, they're like, hey, you just seem really unhappy at work. Like, let's unpack
Mm.
that. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I'm taking away here is one, listen to your gut, right? Listen to your instincts. They may not be wrong. Usually they're not.
Mhm.
Most they're not. Two, surround yourself with your support system and
Mhm.
get a second opinion, right?
Yes.
Have someone else like look at it, just like
Mhm.
what you did with your sister. And then three, make a plan. And I like how you said just map it out, right? What do you
Mhm.
want your life to look
Yeah.
like? And then if you don't have the privilege to leave the job, I agree with you.
Mhm.
You should just stay in it to have the paycheck,
Yeah.
but just reduce your time that you're investing in
Yes.
the
Oh,
job.
yeah.
And
You don't
then
need to give
spend
200%.
40% of that time looking for new jobs. Like,
Yes.
Mhm.
And also, I think I want to add that, right? There's options, like maybe you're be okay switching to another group. Could you do internal transfer?
Kristen, but again, you touched on your coaching business earlier. So excited for you to share a little bit more, especially this framework that you've now developed, right, based on all these learnings. So share with us a little bit more about one, your coaching business, right, and how one could apply some of these frameworks in a toxic work situation.
Yeah, I learned this framework from my friend Sharmeen, who's a wonderful product leader, and she referred me to Twitch. And I had gone to her for some advice, and we talked a lot about, kind of what women face when speaking up, right? Sometimes you're accused of being emotional, et cetera. And so I think that has stuck with me, for many things, right? At the end of the day, you're working in a business. What are they going to care about? The business impact. You
Mhm.
need to figure out what the decision makers care about and show the impact there for them to care. I think that this applies to, ever many things in life. And I think with my coaching business, I actually started it up because I had so much inbound. A lot of people kind of reach out to me because they were like, "Oh, you were like so open and raw and talked about your struggle." I think a lot of people, aren't in a position to do that, right? There are consequences, right? Or, maybe
Mhm.
there's consequences for me from this, but I'll deal with it, right? It's worth it for me to be able to help people going through the struggle and share my perspective. And I think the hard thing is, right? I think that framework's really important and just listening to your gut. But I think, this is one way. And that's why I love the work you're doing on the podcast. You're empowering a lot of voices that may not be heard. I think just sharing these stories is so important. And I mentored a lot of folks, especially women through First Rounds Fast Track. And I remember with some of my mentees, we talk about product, but one was a young woman. I was like, "Hey, I just want to share some difficult situations I went through at work. I know that you're not going through them, but just in case you happen upon them, know I'm here. You can text me, but I want to share that this has happened and me how I handled it." And then she was like, "Okay, sure." And then, later she would always call me and be like, "Oh my gosh, Kristen, like everything you've shared with me like ended up happening and just thank you because I kind of knew I could call you or how to navigate this. I would never have known about this because no one like I get it. People don't want to talk about this. It's not fun. It's not sexy. I think sometimes, right, with social media or LinkedIn, people want to talk about their highlight reel.
Mhm.
But I think that if anyone is only talking about that, like you don't know the truth beneath. And I just think great stories and being transparent and talking about it are really empowering. And I think that if we as women can kind of talk about it with each other, lift each other up, and as you share the stories, right, you realize you're not alone. I remember Susan Fowler writing about what happened and reading that at Uber and just saying, "Oh my gosh," when you hear those stories, you're like, wait, it wasn't just me. Cause I think it's so easy to say, "Oh, this is a one-off situation. I'm gonna bury it and not deal with it." And I've
Mhm.
coped with things like that when these things happen. Like instead of, dealing with it, I would just bury it and power through. And then now I'm like, okay, I'm sure that's contributed to my massive burnout that I'm kind of healing from now.
Mhm. Yeah, no, but that's so critical, and I just want to emphasize that, right? Like documenting it, like writing out your story, what happened, how it made
Mhm.
you feel, and what are some of the actions. And you're a prime example of that, and am optimistic that it's going to inspire others as well. So
I
thank
hope
you.
so.
Well,
Yeah,
before we let you go, though, I want you to plug away all of the exciting
oh.
things that are going on in your life.
Oh, thank you. I guess work-wise, yeah, I finally launched KristinMChen.com, which was really exciting. I kind of dragged my feet on it, but it was basically just a way for me to formally get right advisory work, consulting work, and then also just handle like the inbounds I get on coaching. I will say, I love working with everyone, but I especially love working with people who are underrepresented in tech and also a lot of young women to help them navigate their career challenges or any kind of work situations or grow as leaders. That's just something really special to me that I'm hoping that I can help kind of help the next generation of leaders, or if I can help someone not have to learn the lessons the hard way that I
Mhm.
did, I would, I would love that because, right, I think those things take a toll. But I also have planned kind of fun stuff like my mom and I, one of my friends, Nancy Jing, did a really cute cookbook with her mom. And I was talking to her and I was like, wait, I kind of want to do this with my mom as a, family heirloom or for friends, or maybe we'll do some fun content from
Oh,
it. So
yeah.
I've been trying to, just find some other projects right outside of work to keep myself busy. But maybe I do
And you
need to
have a
go chill.
food
Oh, yes,
Instagram.
I do. Oh my gosh. So,
Tell
oh my gosh, I
us.
forgot about it. So, my secret aspiration that I have not spent a ton of time on recently is to maybe be a food influencer. It's more my hobby too. So I'm excited for the cookbook. But when I was at Pinterest, I started this account on Pinterest called Kristin's Test Kitchen. I'm in product. I'm like, you got to use your product, et cetera. And I think at the time I was the top employee creator. I was getting like 2 million views a month. It was really cool. And then I was like, you know what? Let me also do it on Instagram. So it's
Mhm.
Kristin's Test Kitchen on Instagram. So I think for now I'll have a little mix of my like doing a lot of nonprofit work with partners in school innovation, taking some coaching clients. I do all levels, right? Like exec, early career,
Mhm.
mid-career, even students. And then also, product advisory or consulting work helping out with general product things, but also I'll do like a lot of kind of facilitation for executive coaching or offsites, things like that. And then maybe slowly, decrease the work and pick up the food creation.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of your food channel, so
Oh,
please.
thank you. I know I need to
I
cook for you
selfishly
next time
like
you
that.
come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super exciting, and it just makes me happy to see you happier and taking
Oh,
ownership of
thank
your
you.
life and focusing more on the things that
Yeah.
make you happy. So thank you again for being here with us today. And to our audience, obviously, like if this topic resonated, we want to hear from you. Hopefully you haven't had to deal with a lot of that, but I also want to, on behalf of Kristin, offer her services. If you want to take her up on some coaching, please reach out. I've checked out her website. It's prime. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
And yeah, please email us with any of your examples that you may want to share about toxic work environments at whereisthelinepod@gmail.com, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye.